Morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Friday Reflections. My name is Peter Bolland, and you are tuned in to San Diego Oasis, our wonderful community, our wonderful family here in San Diego that has made the transition to online like the rest of us have in a really powerful, beautiful way. And I know that all of you San Diego Oasis regulars know very well what I'm talking about. But if you're new to us today, you have just stepped into an amazing village of committed people who are really serious about connecting people together around learning, around growing, around self-development, around connecting into the community a little bit better and richer. And I'm just so thrilled and honored and proud to be one little tiny voice, one little part of what San Diego Oasis offers. So thank you for your continuing support, your patronage, the $5 you put into the basket today as it went around, so to speak, and that the way that y'all keep showing up. So many regular folks have made Friday Reflections a part of their life. And we've been doing this about 9 months now. And I love getting the emails, the occasional email saying, hey, I really love what we experience together on these Friday Reflections and in the webinars and in everything else that I'm doing, not to mention what all these other hundreds of lecturers, presenters, teachers are offering here in this San Diego Oasis space. So thank you for being here. Quick couple of program notes before we begin. And let me just mention my two upcoming webinars. This coming Tuesday, as always, the webinars are always Tuesday. Why did I almost say Saturday? This coming Tuesday, and that would be the 10th of November, I'm offering a look at Stoicism, and it's called Epictetus, from Roman slave to Stoic philosopher. So Epictetus is a first century philosopher who began and lived much of his young life as a slave. And he eventually earned his freedom. He was quite literate, and he became a teacher of philosophy, of specifically Stoicism, and had a big impact in the next generation on Marcus Aurelius, who was the Roman emperor and also a notable Stoic philosopher. We've already done a webinar on Marcus Aurelius. Let's go back now and look at Epictetus. Honestly, one of my favorite voices in all of philosophy. And you know me, I'm not interested in ancient history. This isn't looking back into the past. This is what we do here in Friday Reflections also quite often, which is seeing if there are ancient insights and voices in the past that can help you and I craft our best lives here and now. That's what I'm always interested in. That's why I was drawn as a young guy to philosophy and religious studies and mythology, because here were all these ancient systems of symbols and concepts that seemed perennial. They seemed timeless. They seemed relevant to the stuff that I was going through. And then I quickly realized it's the stuff that everybody else is going through also. So that's coming up this Tuesday. Please register for that. The link has been placed in the chat right now, so you can register while we're talking even. Then a week later, I'm doing 2 Tuesdays in a row in November. On the 17th of November, we want to get it done because Thanksgiving is coming and all that. So on the 17th of November, this topic's kind of blowing up. We're getting a lot of registration for this one. It's called Buddha and Jesus, Alignment or Discord. I just wanted to put these two great wisdom teachers together, Buddha and Jesus, and compare them. How are they similar? How are they different? Buddha lived 500 years before Jesus, 1,000 miles away in India. And so they both become obviously the namesake of major world traditions, Buddhism and Christianity. They're not the same, the traditions developed along quite different lines, but when you strip all that away and get back down to the teachings of these teachers, some interesting alignments come up. So I want to work on that with you on Tuesday, November 17th. So register for Buddha and Jesus, Alignment or Discord. And Kristen just put that link in the chat right now also as well. So that's good enough for program notes. So not much going on this week, right? Kind of a boring news week, kitten in a tree rescued by the fire department. That's really all they can come up with on these news channels now. No, I'm just kidding. this is one of the craziest news weeks since Gore v. Bush, when a presidential election is not decided that night or the next morning. And we go instead into this very bizarre limbo, which is driving everybody insane on both sides of the aisle. The Trump voters are agonizing because President Trump only has secured 214 electoral college votes. He needs 270. He has a very, very difficult path to the White House. And I think that's why you see him spinning a little bit when you look at his Twitter and look at the public pronouncements he's making. I don't want to make any predictions here. No one's calling the election yet, that's for sure. But at 214 electoral college votes, and he needs to get to 270, that's 56 votes he needs. I don't know if there are that many left. We've got Pennsylvania with 20, Georgia with 16, Nevada with 6, Arizona with 11, Alaska with 3. I don't know how he's going to put 56 together. So the path looks much easier for Joe Biden, doesn't it? Because at 253, he only needs 17. Pennsylvania alone is 20. Georgia is 16. So, and he's ahead now in all 4 of those states. Biden is. He's been ahead in Arizona, ahead in Nevada. Teeny tiny lead in Georgia last time I checked a few minutes ago, and a growing lead in Pennsylvania as well. That was the breaking news this morning. So I don't know where this is all going, but this was in my driveway this morning, right? Biden closing gap in decisive states. And that's all they put above the masthead. This is a very unusual newspaper. Those of you that are fans of print journalism like I am, my dad was in the newspaper business his whole life. Very rarely does a newspaper devote everything above the fold to 2 photos and a headline. There's no side articles. There's nothing. This is a big deal, and that's on a lot of our minds. Now, don't panic. Friday Reflections has not suddenly become a political program. However, it seems to me sort of unavoidable to think about where we are as a nation and where we are as a people today. And so democracy is a funny thing. And sometimes, I don't know how you feel about it. Sometimes I'm afraid of it. When I see an angry mob, when I see what horrific things happen when majorities accept cruelty and injustice as norms. But sometimes I think democracy is the only thing that's going to save us. That group conscience does, I've got this deep fundamental optimism that group conscience, if you trust it, if you are patient with it, will of its own accord point toward the good. As Dr. King reminds us, the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. But it takes a long time, and we have to do the bending. It doesn't bend itself. So one of the things that's on a lot of our minds these days is the Electoral College. And many of you already know this, but I have, out of the blue, and I'll tell you the whole story in a second, that the phone rang one day, and my friend Amar Campanajjar called me and said, "How would you like to be on the Electoral College?" And I said, "You mean that thing everybody hates?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Sure, let's do it." So I'm like, what are you talking about? How does this work? Well, some of you know who Amar Campanajjar is. He was in a really epic struggle against Republican powerhouse Darrell Issa in the 50th district, just over the hill from my house here, all of East County, one of those classic gerrymandered districts, all of East County. And they went up and grabbed Temecula out of Riverside County just to ensure that it would swing toward the Republican side like forever. And it looks like that is continuing to be the case. But Amar Campanajjar is an old student of mine from 12 years ago at Southwestern College, and we've stayed in touch. I've shared with you about him before. I really like him, and we hang out. And he's a remarkable young man, and he's called into politics for all the right reasons. It really reminds me of what's great about this country, that men and women decide to put themselves in that position. And if you follow the race in the 50th, the savagery with which he has been attacked is It just really turns your stomach. And he knew it was going to be like that. I mean, nobody who goes into politics is naive. You know you're going to get savaged. But he kept his optimism through all of this, and he's really trying to give back. I mean, it's not just a cliche for him. He wants to serve the district in which he was born. He was born at Grossmont Hospital. He's a kid of the 50th district. So anyway, Mark Camponajar, because he was the #1 vote getter in the primary last March, you know, of all candidates of all parties, he got more votes in the primary than Darrell Issa and Carl DeMaio and all the other folks back in March. So as the #1 vote getter in March, the California state rules say that he is charged with this task of selecting one elector for the California Electoral College. So that's how it works. And he, for some reason, called me, and I was just thrilled to death. And so as we go on in the program today, I'll share a little bit more with you about how that actually works. Here's why I want to talk about the Electoral College today. It may seem like a very strange subject for Friday Reflections, but I've been getting so much email from people asking me to explain the Electoral College because people have seen both my op-ed in the San Diego Union Tribune last week. If you want to read it, just Google Peter Bolland, San Diego Union Tribune, and it'll come up. I wrote an op-ed for them last week. And then because of that, Channel 10 News called me a couple days ago, emailed me and said, hey, can we talk to you and do a Zoom with you and about being in the Electoral College? I said, you're sure. So that's also something some of you have seen on Channel 10 was it yesterday or the day before? So that's also Googleable if you wanted to see that. But I can distill all this down for you. So those two appearances in the UT and ABC 10 have really kind of blown up my inbox. And instead of explaining, oh, thank you, Kristen, for putting the link to my op-ed in the chat. So that suddenly thrust me reluctantly and awkwardly into the guy who explains the Electoral College. Like, oh my God, I better learn something about the Electoral College, because I am no historian. I'm no political science expert. I'm just a guy like all of you. You know, I'm interested in politics, and Amar and I talk about it all the time. And for these last 12 years, we're on the phone all the time, working through stuff and figuring stuff out. And he knew that I would really be into this and excited about it. So I decided to do it now. Oh, and there's the Channel 10 thing too. Thank you, Kristen. So now those of you who are in the chat see all those links. So let me go back. And with this caveat, I have often been a staunch critic of the Electoral College because it is fundamentally undemocratic. And we'll get into why that is in a minute. And I also want to get into why Alexander Hamilton and James Madison constructed this strange device back in the hot summer of 1787. So put yourself back in Philadelphia, 1787. Just a few years after the Declaration of Independence and the battles of the American Revolution. And the Continental Congress is trying to put something together. They're trying to get all these various commonwealths, you know, Virginia and Massachusetts, and they're trying to get all these essentially sovereign nations. I know it's hard for us to hear it that way, but at that stage of the game, there was no United States. Each state considered itself a sovereign nation. And the only way they could bring these states together into a United States was by making sure that each state retained a ton of its own power, a ton of its own autonomy. So all of you saying we should abolish the Electoral College, let's just have a nationwide popular vote. I just want to bring you into an understanding of why they constructed it this way. I'm not going to defend the Electoral College, but I'm fascinated sort of philosophically what the arguments were that led them to make this decision to create this thing. So if you're mad at the Electoral College, and you probably ought to be, you're mad at the United States Constitution. And Were a lot of things in the Constitution that aren't so great. I'm not one of those dominionists who believes that the United States was founded by God and the US Constitution is scripture and we must never touch it. I think it's just an awkward contract pounded out by people who were deeply conflicted. It's full of profoundly absurd compromises, but they had to reach those compromises just to put the Union together, like letting slavery go on. There were abolitionists in 1787 who said we need to outlaw slavery, but they needed to put the Union together. And Virginia and other Southern states weren't having it. And it's not like racism stopped at the Mason-Dixon line either, right? Let's get that right. In 1787, only 1 out of 6, let me do my fingers right here, only 1 out of 6 Americans could vote. You had to be white, you had to be male, and you had to be rich. There were actually income requirements and property holding requirements to run for office and to vote. So trust me, for Madison and Hamilton, all the other framers, the founders, they had never heard of the idea of universal vote, and that would have been a profoundly absurd concept to them. And at the time in 1787, no nation on earth selected its top leader by a universal popular vote. Nobody. So they had no model that even suggested that that was possible or sensible. And besides, like I just said, they didn't even have universal vote for dog catcher or mayor. Why would they use a universal vote for president? So they decided in their infinite wisdom that we should have this thing called the Electoral College. So if you want to read the Constitution later, it's in Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 1 is all about the legislature, right? That's why everybody always says the House and Senate are the most important part of the government. And they almost didn't create a presidency because they detested monarchy so much. And they knew, and George Washington really fought this too. He's like, I don't think we should have a president because it'll just turn into a monarchy. We're so conditioned to have kings and queens. Let's not have a president. Let's just have legislatures and courts. But the argument for having a president won the day. And so they went about figuring out how to select the president. Again, Article 1 is all about the selection of the House and the Senate. And the House, of course, is apportioned to population. That's why we have a census. So California has the most people. So we have the most congressional representatives. Therefore, we have the most electors. California has 55 electoral college votes. I think the next state is Texas at like 39, and then New York at 29, and then it's down to like Alaska with 3. So 55 is a behemoth, right? Because we have the most people. So that's how the House of Representatives work. You get a new congressperson when you get a certain X number of people. So the House represents us proportionately by population, but the Senate represents us as states alone. So North Dakota, which the entire state of North Dakota has like, what, 3 million people? I'm winging it with these numbers, but that's not far off. Like the city of San Diego is way bigger than the entire population of North Dakota. And they have 2 senators. And we have 33 million people in California. And we have 2 senators. You see how unfair the US Senate is. You see how decisions made by the US Senate favor tiny, rural, conservative states. And to give the US Senate the role of selecting all judges, including Supreme Court judges, ensures states' rights. And again, that was a deal that Madison and Hamilton and the other framers of the Constitution had to make, or they would not have been able to put the United States together. They had to make this weird compromise of giving states all this power. A lot of people are kind of done with the Senate too. It's like, it's so undemocratic that if you happen to be a North Dakota resident, you have 6 times more representation in the Senate than if you live in California. How's that fair, right? So we hope that the House sort of balances that out. Well, one of the ways we balance it out is with the Electoral College. So they said, let's create the Electoral College. And that's in Article 2 of the Constitution, which discusses how we pick a president. And so they knew they couldn't trust the House and Senate. Because if they let the House and Senate pick a president, kind of like the way they do it in the UK, where the House of Lords and the House of Parliament picks a prime minister. People in England don't vote for prime minister. You think the Electoral College is crazy? Do some reading about Germany, how they pick their chancellor. Their prime ministers. Angela Merkel, or is it chancellor? It's way more labyrinthine, bureaucratically complex and absurd than the Electoral College, which is already absurd enough. So they knew they couldn't trust the legislature because they would it'd just be cronyism, right? They just pick their favorite people. They said, we need to select a non-professional body called the Electoral College. In fact, it's not called the Electoral College in Article 2 of the Constitution. That term doesn't come along until the 19th century. They're just called electors. And all it says in the Constitution is that in each state, the state legislators, the US Congress people in that state will choose the electors. And there isn't much language beyond that. So it is up to each state as to how it exactly picks the electors and how the electors should vote. So Hamilton and Madison and the other framers of the Constitution were opposed to direct democracy for reasons we already stated. Call it racist if you like. And in fact, slavery is a big part of this. Or how about, to be even maybe more specific, white supremacy and patriarchy, making sure that just white men make all the decisions for everybody because they're so smart. So that's the structural design of the United States. We've been amending it ever since, right? And that's Lincoln's, beautiful term of, creating a more perfect union. In other words, the United States has never lived up to its promise. It's never lived up to its promise of that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. I mean, Jefferson meant white men when he wrote that. And now we mean all human beings, regardless of cognitive ability, ethnicity, gender identification, religion, color of skin, educational level, etc. So we keep changing the meanings of the words, and that's really what we're supposed to be doing. And so a lot of people are interested in changing the Electoral College. It's hard to kind of overturn the Constitution, though. Maybe an easier path to change the Electoral College would be to do it at the state level. 48 of the 50 states are winner-take-all states. And for many of us, that's where the undemocratic part comes in. So only 2 states allot their electors proportionately based on the popular vote in their states, Nebraska and Maine. That's what makes the maps we're all looking at these days a little confusing, because some of the electors go to Trump in Maine and some of them go to Biden, and same in Nebraska. But every other state, all the other 48 states, is winner take all. Let's look at California. So on Tuesday night, it was pretty much decided. Trump lost in California, as everybody expected, right? The state skews blue. And so Biden got 65% of the vote in California, and Trump got 33%. 33% of California is still 10 million people. Not that many voters, right? I'm talking about the population in general. Basically, a third of California wanted Donald Trump for president. But look what happens. Because Biden won the popular vote in California, when I go to Sacramento on December 14th to cast my vote as an elector, I am bound by the rules to cast my vote for whoever won the popular vote in California. We are a winner-take-all state. All 55 electors in California will vote for Joe Biden, even if they're Republican Trump supporters. As an elector, you don't vote your own conscience. As an elector, you represent the people of your district, and you follow the state's rules. And this could go either way. This is why all these races are so fascinating in the news. Why, if Biden wins Georgia by 1 vote, well, first of all, they're already committed to a recount. But if you win a state by 1 vote, you get all that state's electoral votes. And that means half the state just gets erased. It's like, why did I even vote? My vote vanished because all power is handed over to the Electoral College. That's why we're all watching these numbers, right? You have to get to 270. So that leaves some of us a little, I don't know what word to use here, disappointed, frustrated. It doesn't seem like a democracy. You can see why voter turnout is so low, because it doesn't seem like I have any power, that what's going to happen is what's going to happen. And, you know, we're a long ways away from Hamilton and Madison. And although now we've all seen the musical Hamilton, you've all seen it, right? Put the closed captions on and play it. It's fantastic. But we are a long way from what they thought. We don't agree with what they thought. We have our own views of things, and maybe we need new systems and so on. So what's also so unsettling today is how close it is. And no one's going to walk away from this election happy, not Trump supporters and not Biden supporters. All these wild allegations about voter fraud aside, the idea that half of us voted for Joe Biden and half of us voted for Donald Trump, of those who voted, to put it more realistically, a third of us voted for Trump, a third of us voted for Biden, and a third of us eligible voters did not vote. That's how it always is in America. So that leaves us all a little frustrated and sad and unsettled. And as exciting as the horse race aspect is of these last hours and days of this election and trying to plot trends and so on, you know, there is a member of Congress now who is a QAnon supporter. And QAnon, of course, is this completely mad, harebrained conspiracy theory that, well, I won't go into what they believe, but it's absolutely bat poop crazy cuckoo. And a woman, I believe it's in Georgia, right, is now in the House who is a QAnon supporter. And so conspiracy theories are kind of where we are now in America. And no matter what happens, there's a sort of darkness around all of this. And it reminds me of Winston Churchill's great line that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Yeah. And it is goofy and messy and kind of frustrating. And yet, compared to all the other forms of government, dictatorship, monarchy, etc., at least in this messy form of government, regular people have a shot at affecting the outcomes, at wresting some power away from the elites. I'm also reminded of the other Churchill quote that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter, especially a QAnon supporter. So this was Plato's fear, and the great Greek philosopher, 25 centuries ago in fourth century Athens, which, by the way, Hamilton and Madison know all about, because in the 18th century, studying Plato was what every educated person did. Plato, already back in the Republic in the 4th century BC, 5th century BC, argued that democracy has its merits. It's better than tyranny, but it's still dangerous because most people don't know very much, and most people are easily swayed by ridiculous lies. And all through history, we've seen propagandists, from Caligula and other Roman emperors to Goebbels, Adolf Hitler's minister of propaganda, to contemporary political leaders who aren't interested in truth. They just find a lie and they repeat the lie. This is how you do it, right? That's why you buy so many political ads. You just make up a lie, like Amar Campanajjar is a tax cheat or he's a socialist. And then you buy tons of ads on KUSI and you just run that ad 7 times a night, every night for 3 weeks. And enough people just sort of, while they're doing the dishes, they hear Amar Camp-Najar is a socialist and he's a terrorist and he's a tax cheat. And it doesn't matter if none of it is true, if it's all just made up by some person on a keyboard typing away. It becomes true in the mind. That's how manipulatable we are on both sides. And Plato was afraid of that. And he's like, that's why democracy is so dangerous. We need smart people to run things. And I tell you, that was in the air when Hamilton and Madison made the Electoral College. Even white males didn't have access to journalism. They didn't have access to education. They were scattered in rural communities with no real communication. And so that's why they invented the Electoral College. Do we still need it the way it is? I don't think so. But on December 14th, I'll fly on Southwest up to Sacramento and I'll walk into the Capitol and I'll cast a vote for apparently Joe Biden, because that's what California is telling me to do. And yet there's a grief. I think we're all grieving today too, that America is not quite the place we thought it was. So I want to close, as I often do, with a poem I'm reading today from Mary Oliver's amazing book called New and Selected Poems, Volume 2. But I want to read a poem to you today called Lead. Here is a story to break your heart. Are you willing? This winter, the loons came to our harbor and died one by one, of nothing we could see. A friend told me of one on the shore that lifted its head and opened its elegant beak and cried out in the long, sweet savoring of its life, which, if you have heard it, you know is a sacred thing, and for which you, if you have not heard it, you had better hurry to where they still sing. And believe me, tell no one just where that is. The next morning, this loon, speckled and iridescent, and with a plan to fly home to some hidden lake, was dead on the shore. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again to the rest of the world. So as we in various homes celebrate and grieve, usually at the same time, you know, that's what adulting is. We all know the bittersweet taste of life, that it is profoundly majestic, it is debased, it is lofty and inspiring, and it is persistently nauseating. And that's Pandora's box. Once it opened, everything flew out. And if you say yes to any of it, you must say yes to all of it. Even barbecue beer guy screaming into the microphone, you have to say, he's a prophet too. A prophet of madness, but a prophet. And this is the America we have inherited. And the only decision now is, are you going to give up hope, or are you going to keep working for those whose lives are literally on the line? I will keep doing what I do and using the tools that I find laying around me and the tools I've been given, and I know you will too, to keep working for what you believe. The U.S. Senate is on the line. It is tied. And those two seats in Georgia that are both going to go off to a January runoff would turn the Senate into 50-50, with Kamala Harris as the 51st tie-breaking vote. So not only might Joe Biden win the White House, but Democrats still might flip the Senate and still retain power in the House. But we'll see. Those are all the horse race questions again. Philosophically, you and I have to keep our rudder in the water, and I think raise our sails. And after a little wound licking and grieving on all sides, after every American election, the bloodless coup that Jefferson envisioned in the Declaration of Independence, that we would change the government regularly and frequently, and the pendulum would always swing back and forth. Ruth Bader Ginsburg reminded us of that. So the The swing of the pendulum is always disconcerting and dizzying, but we are living through it. Thanks for the few extra minutes. I guess I had a lot on my chest to get off my chest today. See you, I hope, on this coming Tuesday for the Epictetus webinar. See you next Friday for next Friday's webinar. Remember, I'm taking December and January off. I'm putting up the shutters and going into my bear cave to hibernate for a couple of months. So November is our last chance to do a little work together. After that, I'll see you in February in the brave new year. Thanks for being here with me, my friends. See you on the other side.